So now I'd like to introduce tonight's speaker. Dr. Gabrielle Tayac Piscataway is a community-engaged public historian and museum curator. She grounds her work in both living Indigenous knowledge systems and historical methods, and she served as an inaugural curator, historian, and educator at the Smithsonian National Museum of the American Indian, helping to transform museum practices to mutually energize Native reunification with cultural sources for research, community development, and common understanding. At George Mason University, Dr. Tayac oversees the CoCreative History Space to train new generations of public historians in their pursuits to understand and interpret histories near and far, ancient and modern. She has served on numerous advisory boards, councils, and committees, including America 250, Dumbarton Oaks Mellon Initiative on Democracy and Landscape, Historic St. Mary's Commission, and the Maryland Commission on Indian Affairs, Survival International and Amnesty International. She is rooted in the tidewater lands, caring for places, especially along the Nanjemoy Creek, with family striving always to be a good relative and ancestor. And with that, I welcome Dr. Tayac to the podium.
Oh, hi, everybody. It's so nice. Hey, it's so nice to be with you in this really cozy space, right? We've gone through so much sometimes where we're separated from each other. And for those of you who are online, all the aunties and relatives and friends, and also some Kittamaquund descendants, and those I don't know, just want to say hello to you also this evening. So first and foremost, to bring in an awareness of where we are, of where we really are. We're sitting within and contained within each other on a place that has so many layers of history and lives and voices that are spoken and unspoken, some that we know really well and some that we don't, some that have been deeply submerged and want to be heard. And I'm also very grateful to Tudor Place, to my colleagues that like Christy Pekikero and Amy, your work of what you've done to pull this together, to be able to tell a full story, to know that, right, there's historic traumas, but there's also historic joys. And so as a Beaver Clan woman of Piscataway, I belong to an extended family that traces a lineage with a kind of an animal. It's a beaver, and a beaver is an earth diver. You know, a beaver is like you can go beneath the surface and come back up and build and care for family and transform environment and also protect the waters. So that's something that has really sat with me, and it's a quest that I've had for a long time, since I was a little girl. Actually, I grew up in New York City, and I always wanted to know what was underneath the concrete, and also knowing that I was part of a lineage that traces actually right back to here and farther down along the Potomac, and trying to get a sense of what happened to us and picking up stories and understandings along the way. And tonight what I wanted to share with you is to bring forward a woman who was once a child, who breathed the air that was oxygenated from the Potomac River, and her name was Mary Kittamaquund. What I did want to share with you tonight is not a complete history. There are traces that are still evolving and coming forward, but often when we just sometimes have a name and a small account, we can start to unpack that and unpeel that in different ways. So I'll be sharing that with you this evening. So I was thinking about her as an Indigenous foremother, and how she resurfaced, and how truly interesting, fitting, confounding, and potentially revealing it is to work with a history of someone who's also intertwined with the history of this place, with a history of what became Martha Washington's lands and her background. And so, why do we know one person and we don't know the other? It's like, why do we remember what we remember and why do we forget what we forget? And so we're here to remember together tonight. First wanted to start with a calling. And this is the photo. Actually, I'm really very grateful to have my sister, colleague, and co-conspirator Angela Barnes here tonight, who is a Piscataway leader and caretaker of the heart of our most sacred spaces down in Accokeek, Maryland, in a place called Moyon. And it sits directly in gaze with Mount Vernon, directly across the river. Yeah. And it's a site of the largest chief's town. It's a site that has 13,000 years or more of history. And it's directly across from Mount Vernon, and it wasn't preserved and protected because of the fact that it is an incredibly important historic Piscataway Native American site. But it was preserved to protect and preserve the viewshed from Mount Vernon. So I used to have a lot of issues with that. I still kind of do. On the other hand, what an incredible, maybe not irony of history. And sometimes I think, maybe the ancestors are looking out and this is the way that they made it. So it's still there. So these photos, just to show you, this was my grandfather, Philip Proctor. He also went by Turkey Tayac. This is in 1944. And he is at a place, he brought some Smithsonian ethnographers to take a look at this boulder that has a face carved on it. And the face, it was right, I believe, at the head of Piscataway Creek. So this is Prince George's County, Maryland. If you drive down what's called Indian Head Highway, designated Piscataway Highway 210 South, you'll go over like a little bridge you won't even notice, and that's around where this is. So this is perhaps a marker. My uncle, Billy Tayac, was 8 years old at the time. So again, 1944, this photo is taken. And Billy is a little boy. He's standing like here looking. And the ethnographers came and they wanted to take it back to the collection of natural history. So they got out the jackhammer and they started jackhammering, and the stone face disintegrated. Yeah. And then in addition to that, later on, people told them that this particular form and that this incident actually never happened. So fast forward, I'm getting I decided to take also a kind of bookish route. And so I was doing a pre-doctoral fellowship at Smithsonian, and the archivist of photography in the National Anthropological Archives said, "Hey, we have this photo," and I saw it and it was like, this really did happen, So sometimes we just have to travel through time. This photo of him is much later, where he's laying on the graves of our ancestors, where just thousands of our people are buried. Many of them were excavated, taken off into Smithsonian collection and other places, but there's still many ancestors that are there. And so this is right within really the heart of Piscataway. And this is actually my Aunt Julie with my grandfather Turkey's marker, and over a tree, and he was buried. He had to be buried by an act of Congress. It's a whole other story I'll get into, but he died. It took a year. It took us an act of Congress to bury him with his ancestors. So this has always just been a calling, of a trace and an unpacking and a really a journey over time. And it's one that I've been taking through study, through work through archives and getting I like took it as far. I went and got a PhD from Harvard, but I also, probably more importantly, spent a lot of time listening and talking to elders and people all over who were able to have like shreds and pieces of stories, cultural practices, insights, so that when I do encounter history and when I'm looking for it, it's a way of making sense of it. It's a way to understand it that's a little bit different. So that's what I wanted to do with Mary Kittamaquund. Just to also get a sense of where we are, I did want to spend a little bit of time with you getting into context, because I don't know about this, maybe this crowd's a little different, but usually people, we, for no fault of our own, we don't have not everybody has kind of the K-12 background of, well, what is it? Who are Piscataways anyway? And like, what's the land? What's the space? Because this house in Tudor Place, it's not just a singular place. This is within a whole system. It's within a whole breathing system. And we're in Chesapeake, which is also known as the Great Shellfish Bay or the Mother of Waters. It's a rich biosphere. We have the lungs of the bay. Sometimes we complain about the humidity, but that's life. Like that's a breath of life, and I actually like the humidity personally, but, then again, I sometimes do better when I get out of it too. But this is the space where we are. So just to take also a moment, because Mary Kittamaquund was a Piscataway person and a significant one. So we have a history that goes deeper than just the history from 1634 or 1607 or 1565. Piscataway people are part of a larger language family called Algonquin. So language family, like the way you have Romance languages, Slavic languages, there's Algonquin language family. It was a chiefdom, which means that there was a central chief. It's somewhat hierarchical. It's not like just a complete equitable confederation of people. So there is some rank to it. With peoples that go through really from Pointe aux Rocks, Great Falls, you come down all the way the Potomac to the mouth at St. Mary's. I know we have some St. Mary's. St. Mary's is represented tonight. We have St. Mary's in the house tonight, coming down. And then generally between the Patuxent and the Potomac with a little bit over to the other side. And then actually what I'm going to propose tonight is what we can see through Mary Kittamaquund also going into places in Northern Virginia. And so I think through her, it was a way to reclaim and understand the lands that we're on. I also want to mention that for Native people, land spaces, it's not just always so precise about, like when we have plats and deeds and things, it's like, oh, your leaf fell on my lawn, So we have places that, especially when we get back off the waters and into the highlands, into the mountains, there's places that we share. And often, sometimes like through the other people, Ojibwe and Haudenosaunee people, they'll call it a dish with one spoon. Like there's just places that we can all use, that we can all take care of, that we share. And then there's places that are more, that really pertain to particular people. We also have a history of being descended from the Lenape or the grandfather people. There's a oral history that it was 13 generations prior to the Ark and the Dove that the Piscataway were established. And so it's a long time. We think maybe about anywhere from 7 to 12,000 people in the chiefdom. And then we have neighbors, Nanacoke on the eastern shore, Powhatan people to the south, Siouan people to the west, Susquehannocks to the north. Also, just to give you a sense of where we really are in DC, this is a really cool map. We have the Koch tank or Anacostia, Anacostans. It's a Latinized term, and those are the people that belong to the chiefdom. That was our people. So their survivors came back into the fold of Piscataway as our people started to die from epidemics and military incursions, and our people had to sometimes, well, actually just come across from their original tribes and then move together as their populations came down. So looking at Native society to 1634, this is a space where really there's every waterway, every creek, every river had people there, and not just living, out in the wild. These are people who had towns, villages, hamlets. It's just dotted throughout the entire Chesapeake region that you can't see a space. We still speak those names today often, Occoquan, Potomac, right? Accokeek, Anacostia. So you're speaking our language more than you think. It's really kind of amazing. So our people lived in villages and towns, and they would have town chiefs who then would also had a tribute and an interrelationship to the main chiefdom. We were actually not as strict as the Powhatans to the south. I think it was a little bit more relaxed. But this, what you see in the back image here, this is these were paintings that were done from life by John White in 1585, and they were done in what's today North Carolina. I don't know if any of you have heard of the lost colony of Roanoke. So really, but also Algonquin people. And then from everything we can tell from the descriptions of the way that people lived, it really, these paintings and images give us the best window into what it was like here. So sometimes we have to, we don't have the exact, but we have enough to say it was probably pretty close to this. And plus, as I was talking about the space that was the capital town that's right across from Mount Vernon, we know it was a palisaded town with long houses, temples. I mean, that's what the archaeology shows also. And also the memories and oral histories of our people. Our folks lived in extended families and clans coming from the matriline originally. And so it wasn't just like nuclear families, it was large families. So bear clan, turtle clan, wolf clan, deer clan, beavers. I mean, just really accounting for those lineages. And that's a way that it was also so much that we look at the world in a way that's in relationship. I think that that's probably, like I'll tell my students, like if there's just a couple concepts to take out from this, it's that Native people and Native societies are relational. We can refer to animals, plants, moon, stars, sun as relatives, and then also relate to each other in that way. It's not a romantic or mystical thing. Actually, like right through science, we're finding that we are in fact DNA related to so much, and that we have atoms and substances in our bodies that come from the stars. It's not far out. It's I think from people that have very deep relationships with nature and observe it and live within it and not against it, that we start to, that's what science is, right? It's an observation. So, and then that's also cultured. This is just an image of what would be inside of like a very large long house. Where you can see people like moving things in the rafters. People would move in with your mom's family. Like, so if somebody got married, it's what they call matrilocal. So the man would move in with the mother's, with the wife's family, and then the children would pertain to the mother's line. So often like a maternal uncle might be more of a major like male figure than the father. You know, although dads are important too. So yeah. So thinking about Mary Kittamaquund, this would have been the roles and understanding of women's ways and powers that she would have inherited if she had moved forward in a life that was more self-determined as a Piscataway woman. Women were actually incredibly powerful, and they had their own contributions. They provided about 70% of the food source for people. A lot of times people have like a stereotypical notion of that all Native people only relied on hunting and wild food gathering. I mean, that's important. And there are tribes, nations, and communities that rely much more on that. But here in this area, we had agriculture, also like really agroforestry. It's like it's a management of the land. It's not just like living out there. You know, it's actually sculpted and shaped and related to, in a way. I don't know if some of you like are familiar with food forests that people are planting. So this is a way of like reinstating forests and forested areas in a way that like there's more nut trees. It's like a very long-term, what we call permaculture way of living. And so what we're finding is that there's certain kinds of crops and even trees that seem to just be growing wild, but they're not. They're intentionally there. And so women had this role. They also practiced something called companion planting and have continued that, which is where you would maybe plant, if you plant corn, beans, and squash together, that is now in agricultural science terms, it's like companion planting. So if you put the corn in and then the beans can twirl around they can get a pull from the corn, and then the squash and pumpkins. I saw some really cute pumpkins, by the way, like on people's stairs outside. It was really, really nice. So those grow along the grow between the rows, and they help to keep the weeds out. And then the beans fix the nitrogen back into the soil. So it's like this whole way. You actually can still see it. You can see it throughout the Americas, really, in indigenous communities or people that have learned from that. They're also healers. They're working with medicine plants. Often it's been thought that this was learned from the bears, that the bears taught people about medicine. Bears and people can eat the same thing. So if you watch a bear, the bear will teach you. And so bears are considered healers and teachers, and people who are in a bear clan, they carry that medicine tradition and knowledge because they've learned from bears. Also clan mothers, so that's folks that are taking care of the extended family. Council women in their own right, by the way. So you have the chief, you have a council, and then that council and set of advisors, women could be in those roles. And women could also be in most Algonquin societies, you'll find that women could be chiefs in their own right. And they're called Warawansqua. So it's not just because they married somebody who died and then they kind of stepped into it. It's like they actually could assume those roles, not of the highest position, but of the towns. And so, yeah, I was just thinking about the round and the way that we can restore like corn and strawberries, which is considered a feminine plant. The service berry that announces the fish runs, the relationship to the moon, the seeds that are related to women's fertility, like when a girl comes into, when she comes of age, when she has her first period. The teaching is to sing seed songs from gourds, you know, so you have that kind of relationship. So, all right, so that's that world part. Enter Maryland. So we have a 1632 charter from King Charles, and he deeds out and scopes out all of Piscataway land pretty much to Lord Baltimore. So Maryland is created on paper before the ships ever get here, without any conversation, consultation to any native people. So this whole world that I just showed you, it's as if it's what we call terra nullius, vacant, not doesn't matter. It's there for subjugation of barbarous nations, is what they have in the Maryland Charter. I'm sorry, I made a mistake on the typo. It's 1634. I switched that on the slide. My apologies. So 1634 is Ark and the Dove, and they're also not coming into a completely vacant space. We also already have the Spanish have been in the Chesapeake from the 1560s. They've taken captives. Jamestown happens in 1607. There's diseases raging up and down the coast. The Powhatans to the south have already been engaged in several really devastating wars. There's the French, the Swedes, the Dutch. There's a lot going on in this world. It's not just like, oh, the great wings of the birds have shown up on our shores. It's really, and so this is what starts to change what would become Mary Kittamaquund's world. At first, there's another Tayac. So Tayac is the high chief, right? So it's like the president, commander in chief is the Tayac. That's a title. The chief that is there in 1634, his name is Wanas, and he descends from a lineage from about 1200. It might be a little bit earlier, from the first Tayac. The succession, it's not from father to son. It goes from brother to brother to brother to the sister's son. So that's the way the chief line is supposed to work. And he's the high chief of about 12 nations, maybe some more. And I've already mentioned the population. So Leonard Calvert comes, the ship is here, the ships are here, and they land where the Tayac is. And he's already really aware of what's going on. It's not, it's not a unknown. And he tells them that he would not bid him go, neither would he bid him stay, but he might use his own discretion. That's what he says. And they end up at St. Mary's, Yakamako. This is also one of the paintings that comes from the John White paintings. We think it's Chief Wingina, who is one of the chiefs of down at like Hatteras. Anybody ever been to the Outer Banks? It's like that's actually like the first attempt. And what's interesting here is that seeing the way that he's presented, often what they talked about, and this is not one us, but it just gives you an idea, that these are people who in terms of leaders, they don't necessarily look that different than commoners. They might have a symbol of authority, but they also have to do things for themselves. They're not like kings, really. Wanas is not super warm with the colonists, and he commits an act of his brother Kittamaquund, who's also known as Chitamachin, commits an act of fratricide and murders Wanas maybe around 1636. He cultivates a friendship with Father Andrew White. So again, Maryland was a Catholic colony. And so it's very distinctive, and it's an English Catholic colony. So that's a little different. It's not a French Catholic or Spanish. It's English Jesuits. And so we have Kittamaquund cultivates a relationship with Father Andrew White. It's certainly possible that this is a real friendship, but there's always political alliances and strategies involved, right? The world is changing, and he's looking at creating that relationship. And he converts to Catholicism along with wife and daughters in a bark chapel. And again, apologies for the typo here. There were some things that didn't quite connect when I was doing this on SharePoint. He assumes the name Charles, and he marries his wife, who is Mary, not Mary Kittamaquund, but that's the name. I just wanted to point out some really important places that are still within the Piscataway world. St. Ignatius Catholic Church in Port Tobacco, a site of early conversion. In it, it has a more modern stained glass that commemorates the July 5th, 1640 conversion. Our people still go there. It's the same. It's within the same. It's the same place. The bricks of what was the Indian mission, and that's really like a core of our community. My great grandmother is buried there. If any of our Piscataway people are online tonight, you have somebody that's buried there. So we also have this very distinctive kind of history that intertwines with Catholic history. I do want to just take a moment in that thought that our language is in Georgetown, in the special collections. I just want to give a shout out to Mary Beth Corrigan. Thank you for being here. That's in a manuscript that has the only surviving written source of the Piscataway language, and our people are starting to be able to reconnect directly physically with this manuscript. It's incredibly precious, and it's key to being able for us to recover the language. So I think about it, and by the way, it's now digitized, and like the metadata is awesome, and it's been conserved. So I'm really, really grateful for that. So we're also in the presence for me being here in Georgetown. We're just close to those words that were spoken and written by somebody's hand. Somebody spoke it. It came out of their mouth. It went into the hand. It was written. So it's just a very significant piece, also related to this space. Okay. So I also want to introduce, there's a very powerful family, the Brent family, particularly Mistress Margaret. This is a fairly newer painting. It's not from life, of her doing advocacy in court. But we have Margaret Mary Folks Giles arrive in St. Mary's in 1638. She becomes the first female landowner. She amasses more land, head rights to servants, indentured servants, and is an executor for Calvert and an attorney for Lord Baltimore. She's often thought about as like one of the first feminists, like one of the first people, there's something very distinctive about Maryland too, like this kind of history of advocating for women's voices. And she comes up in the context there's also then a context of the English Civil War. And she has land investments that are extensive in Virginia, including in Stafford. So just to keep her in mind, and I'll tell you why in a sec. Okay. So little Mary Kittamaquund, finally getting to her. And the thing is, we don't really know that much about her. We don't know that much. And part of what I wanted to bring up tonight is we need to understand the context of who she was, who she might have been. We were just chatting a little bit before the lecture started. I don't know what her name was, really. What did she call herself? She was really little. She was 7 when she was sent to St. Mary's for education. This marker is over in Stafford County. And so again, I'm thinking about, what do we have of her? There's a marker, there's a road marker, maybe a couple other things. But when we think about some of the foundational, women's history in general is hard to find, and often very undervalued. But now we're talking about a colonial era Native American woman, who is not Pocahontas or Matoaka. This is who is also really not that well known for who she is in her own right. So how do we start to think about her? She's sent to St. Mary's. She becomes a ward of Leonard Calvert and Margaret Brent. We think by age 10, 1644, she's married to Giles Brent, who's the brother, who's 38 at the time. I know I had this whole thing with my students today about Matoaka, Pocahontas, and John Rolfe and John Smith, and just the ages, just the age disparities, the power disparities that we find with people. So she's married to him. We have also, more upheaval. So it's not just between like Native people and English people and French people. We have issues between Protestants and Catholics, right? And so Piscataways who've converted to Catholicism, they're also brought right into the crosshairs of that for being Catholic converts. It's like, okay, so we converted, so now you're still, it's like, okay, here we are. So it's like a double, triple punch. And he's sent back in chains to England. He comes back, and there's like an attempt at this like Pocahontas strategy to gain her land, but it's not really successful. We think that she died by September 1655, but then there's some conversation that maybe she lived. We don't know exactly. Some of this becomes very suppositional, and I know there's some experts and people in the room who've been thinking about this for a long time, and so I really I would love to have that conversation too. So just to say hello to one of the family, I think Asher Underwood, his wife Melissa, and their two little girls are online. They are direct descendants of Mary Kittamaquund. Yeah, and we also want to say a greetings to Mary Harding Byrne and Worthington Peter Pierre. I don't know, are you in here tonight? Hi. Anyway, hello to the fam. It's nice to see you. So there are direct descendants, some of whom most people ended up going into English society of the descendancy, but we also have people that are still descended that are folded back into what becomes the Piscataway community. So there's a lot of work right now that's being done on the children through DNA, through genealogical research. There's a debate about the children that maybe it's only Giles Jr., Mary Brent, Richard Brent. But there was also an archivist and historian, really beloved person in Maryland history, Lois Carr, and she identified three more, Catherine, Henry, and Margaret. There was a DNA study and then genealogies that are pointing to the family lines of Bevan and Brent and Marsham and Queen, and also a geneticist named Roberta Estes who's done a lot of analysis. So I'm finding in the past few years more people who are saying, hey, guess what? Like I'm a descendant. And one of them was in my class. One of them was a graduate student in my class, and she was just all so quiet, like almost the whole semester. And then said, "Well, I wasn't really sure what to say, but she's like, I'm a descendant of Mary Kittamaquund. And we've done the genealogy and the DNA and everything. And she's actually working at Mount Vernon, which is kind of amazing. So we have, there's, again, like we have the Piscataway community, the tribal community. We have people that we've lost. We have people that they ended up migrating up north. It wasn't an easy migration. It was being pushed out because of violence. Some of our descendants live in Canada, some in Oklahoma. But there's also this other strand, and it just brings up to me that there's like a web of people, and some of them are still here, right? It's carrying that kind of lineage and understanding and tie. So I'm not going to read this whole thing, but there was a controversy that came up after Kittamaquund died, to try to get Mary Kittamaquund to assume the leadership, like as a queen. And this was a tactic, really, to access land that was Piscataway land and bring it into the English fold, because the English system, right, is that the man would inherit the wife's property, which is really almost the opposite of what would happen in Piscataway society, because the long house, the fields, all of that belong to that all belongs to the woman, to the women's line and the clan line. So very, very different. The Piscataway people pushed back on this when there was an attempt to do a succession, and they insisted that it would come back into their own system. Eventually, that system didn't hold, and there was a father-son succession with chiefs a little bit later. But this is just so we also have an issue of Mary Kittamaquund. I was thinking, like, how much is she being used? How much is she in a diplomatic role? How much is she, does she have any agency at all in any of this? Right? Like, what does that mean? And what does her land mean at all? I do want to mention that she has a son, Giles Brent Jr., who's a key figure in Bacon's Rebellion, major historic moment. And it was really interesting because he took the side of, he was like fully on like anti-Indian militia, involved with killing Dogs and Susquehannocks. And at first there was also this question about, like, well, how could that be? Like, he's half Piscataway. Like, why would he go against his own people? And then I was thinking, well, maybe, they're not his own people, actually. Like, they're a different tribe. And maybe this is also, and I started, like, with this, I started to think about, well, maybe that's a pushback from a Piscataway sensibility, even though it's violent and brutal. And maybe that's an intertribal piece. But let me get to also kind of the punchline here, which is with Piscataway lands, we can see that in Mary Kittamaquund's lands. Where she lived, she assumed a property that came to be known as River Farm. If you Google, you Google map Piscataway Neck, it's on Piscataway Neck. I was like, oh, it's still Piscataway. That's kind of amazing. And so this is where she and her husband had this property. This is on the Mount Vernon estate. This is me with my students. Who's one of the descendants who was like, hey, guess what? And so we're standing at Mount Vernon, and then looking right across. It's just right across, right there is where Mary Kittamaquund's land, the main chief's towns were, and where her people were. And it really made me think that she's just right there. The rivers are not dividers in our culture. The rivers are connectors. So if we start to think about it that way, is this a way also of having Piscataway, right, kind of reaffirming and putting it into English terms of Piscataway presence onto what becomes Mount Vernon? I used to, again, think that this was this just odd coincidence and irony that our land, that our sacred site was preserved because it's within the viewshed of Mount Vernon. But then if you think about this, Mount Vernon is Mary Kittamaquund's land, part of it, not all of it, but part of it, right? Legally. And it becomes assumed in it. So it's just an interesting thing to think about. So I'll kind of close it there. I think that when we start to when you start to turn the gaze, like when you physically turn the gaze, because some of this thinking came because I do teach at George Mason. I teach on the Virginia side, and I started to think about it a little bit more. To understand that both River Farm, also Chappawamsett Island, by the way, which is right next to like part of Conoco, was also her land. That was her property. She lived there. So I don't think that it's just it's just a coincidence or an irony. I think that this also, some of this very early formative period, which becomes the places where the country's founding fathers are, that there's a foremother that precedes them. So I'll close it there and just be really interested in hearing what you think. Thank you. And also, like, if you're like, I don't know about that, I would definitely welcome that kind of inquiry as well.
Is there much information about her, or you have written about her, in terms of, kind of what happened during her life? I don't know if there's anything so that we have a better idea of how these.
Yeah, I mean, there's some work that's been done, some articles. I think probably some of the best source, I know, like I was mentioning, Lois Carr is somebody who's done the work. I don't know if you'd like to add. I have a colleague here from St. Mary's who you said you just taught about Mary Kittamaquund today in class. So just thinking about like how you also, just curious about how you teach about her and what you draw from as well.
Mary Watson's article on her, which I have found sort of the most comprehensive that I've come across. And then we look at my writing, writing about her in the book that I'm producing. And I teach senior undergrad history students in a Maryland seminar, so they are kind of part of my editorial process.
Right.
So we're working on this on Thursday.
Okay.
And one of the things that I know historically my students have been really interested in and what grabs them is that age difference, like you said, and how we talk about that sexual relationship.
Yeah.
And the fact that she does have multiple children.
Right.
And connections drawn to between sort of the exploitation of the colonists and the
right.
land on their own European terms.
Right.
And the parallel exploitation of bodies, and also thinking about like a feminine earth and a woman's body and fertility, and this very patriarchal claiming of both of those things, and then subsequent exertion of control through power over these fertile reproductive bodies, which I know is not a fully formed thought, but is absolutely something that
right.
really forefront of my mind.
Right. Right. When's your book coming out?
I have no idea.
Okay. Sorry. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but
27, I think. So another little bit.
okay. That's great. Thank you so much for doing that work too. Yeah. Okay. Yep. Sorry, Mark. Yeah.
This is so beautiful and moving. Thinking about, we were talking a little bit before about the long history of IW.
Yeah.
Persons that is so grounded in these very close connections between women, land, reproductive energies that are continuously appropriated, but also created.
Yeah.
But that Foremother line is so enormously interesting. It makes one think of so many things. George Washington does, in unguarded moments, admit that for all of his fixation on tobacco and planting, what's really keeping multiple farms going is the shad run.
Yeah.
She doesn't know much about. He's clearly relying on both indigenous and enslaved African knowledge of the movements of the water, the shad, and of other, and of this very complex marine or ecosystem. And in that sense, the whole wealth of the place is at so many material and symbolic senses tied in indigenous and, as you say, matrilineal knowledge of place and energies and flows, so that this site, which in a sense Tudor Place is an extension of, in this whole extended sort of Washington world, is based not just on the appropriation of physical labor, reproductive sexual labor, but of certain kinds of spiritual powers that are but then are constantly obscured at the same time.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And that's what I love about also what you said about, just right, that feminine earth and, women's bodies in the land and when we really think about it. So I really appreciate that question. Thanks also for leading out that question that got us into this conversation. Yeah, go ahead. We'll go back.
Piscataway, a space that's sacred to you, that really speaks to you, that we should be maybe going to or learning about.
Yeah. So there are a number of places. The most sacred place is actually within Piscataway National Park. It's not a secret. It's not roped off. Sometimes, we wish that it would be more, I don't know, just a little bit not as accessible. However, on the other hand, when we have these spaces, I do think that there's a point, especially in a place that's so public and so accessible. I'm of the opinion that one of the ways to protect it is to let more people know to also help to protect it. This is a site. It's called the Akokee Creek site. It's again within Piscataway National Park. It's an ossuary. It's an active site of prayer. Our people have ceremony and go there. And sometimes, we're there and, somebody's there with like their dog and their Frisbee, and it's a little weird because it's actually, this is like the Mecca Wailing Wall. It is like the most sacred place. And it's become, I think, especially with the development over the past 30 years in particular, it's become more of a suburban like kind of location than a rural one. But that's definitely a space to go that you can find. I think taking a walk down at Akokee Foundation is a really beautiful experience. Lately, I've made a return to Nanjemoy, Maryland, which is not also, I mean, that's kind of far out. Nobody's ever heard that. Well, Angela grew up there. Like, I think it's actually one of the places that it's still protected enough and it's healing enough that's a space that that we've gone back to or that have kind of reconnected to. I mean, there's Piscataway people there, and there's been like all along, but it's also a way of like consciously having a space that can be for us. So also the families, different Piscataway families and lineages hold these spaces too. So, but probably, you know, the most accessible one is Piscataway Park, you know. So when you go, like, you're not going to really see anything about what it is. I think they're doing some interpretation. There's beautiful interpretation, by the way, at Akokeek Foundation trails about knowledge of plant and wildlife and what we call indigenous cultural landscape. So that's a good space to go. But that place, it's a really powerful space for me. Like, that's like kind of that's the cathedral one. Like, so yeah, my own is like where you like, that's like the Notre Dame one. Like, that's the big one. And then we also have these spaces that, you know, where ceremony, where refuge, energy can be, and you could just be yourself and not have to always be on display. A lot of times, a lot of Native people like very much in the public eye, you know, and like spend a lot of time, which is, you know, it's a good thing. But also there needs to be some space where you just be like, we just be. So that's what I've been working on in addition to the research and curatorial work that I do. I have like a running alongside part of my life with an organization what we call Nakamako. It's an intertribal Native women's organization, and that's where we've kind of centered back in Nanjemoy Creek. Yeah. And oh, by the way, the first like photos I was showing, that's off of Nanjemoy Creek, the background there. So yeah, please. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. I'm going to try to pronounce this right. It's Emmanuel Sacerdotum. Am I saying that right? Yes, thank you. Okay. So that's, it's basically so that's what the actual manuscript is. That's what the book is. Like, that's what the manuscript is. But there's some, you know how in a book there's some blank pages in the beginning, or there used to be like some like blank. So that's where the writing is, that it's the creed, the commandments, attempts at translation. So that's like written by hand. It's like notes. So it's not the book itself is not about that. It's you know, and what's amazing is like this would be the manuscript that is held and carried by the priests themselves. And so it's very personal. It's like very small, you know. And and of course, you know, Mary Beth wants to say anything more about it, but it's really, I think that there's an intimacy in this in the writing in the manuscript, because it's just like, you know, so like you don't have paper, so you're going to write this down, you know, it's like, so that it's like right there to be able to do that work, to do that religious work with those communities, and seeing the way that, there's the writing that's done is even trying to figure out how to translate some concepts into English, from English into Piscataway. So something that we did note, and I'm just going to say this here, because I'm still investigating, I'm still thinking about this, is that one of my sister colleagues, Hope Butler, and I were like thinking about it after we went to go see it in person, and realized that in part of the writing, Father White says, he breaks into English and you see like naughty men. And then Hope is like, oh, that's the creed. And it's like naughty men. It's like, why do you have to say naughty men? And then we're like, that's sinner. Like, they didn't have a word for sin. Yeah. Blew my mind. And I've heard that before. Like in Native, you know, like, oh, they didn't have a word for sin. And it was like, we actually saw it because he didn't. I think that's what that was. And I'm still thinking about it. I don't know. Anyway, note to self, you heard it here. I have to publish that. But like, I think, yeah, but I think that that's something that's really interesting. And I don't know, but that was just what came to our mind. We might not be right, but that's what it felt like. We don't know. Yeah. So, yeah, please.
I'd love to hear your thoughts because one of the big challenges of recovering these stories is that scholars have so many different disciplines that we're trained in.
Yeah.
Historians are doing one kind of work, archaeologists another, and then so many of these stories are passed down orally
Right.
among Piscataway communities, but also across Indigenous communities.
Right.
And sometimes there's a failure of collaborating and working together and sharing. That
Right.
knowledge.
Right.
So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on how we better bridge those gaps.
Yeah.
That's one question, but then I'm also really interested from you and from Angela about like history keepers and memory keepers among Piscataway.
Yeah.
Whether that is a tradition that is under threat or if that oral culture is, I know it's vibrant now, but is there hope of that surviving?
Yeah.
Next generation?
Yeah. It's always under, anything like with oral and traditional culture there's always a threat level to it. What I will say is that it's probably more dynamic now than it's been in a really long time. And that I think when we work with Indigenous people and Indigenous history, and I don't know, like given everything that's going on right now, I'm like, we're working with and studying and looking at history where people were like, they already experienced the end of the world. Like the world ended and ended and ended and ended. Catastrophe. And Angela and I are not supposed to be here. And here we are, So that's a lot of work. Like that doesn't just happen. Like that's a lot of work. And so, I think with those memory keepers, something about process. So I was trained first as a social worker and then I have like my degrees in sociology. Then I went into a museum. I was like, I don't know, don't you just throw stuff in a case? I don't know about, and I kind of ended up in it because I have this like very specific specialization. But it also means a lot of the ways that I know for me to interpret things is because I do talk to elders and I not only just Piscataway people, but other people, Haudenosaunee women. And I've been able to like go alongside of them for the past like 40 plus years now, just and also in I've spent a lot of time like in South America, so and with Mayan day keepers and other people. So like people, it's kind of like getting I find that really helpful, like to get the ways of understanding it. And then some of it's just like this, like, here we are in the room, it's awesome, it's amazing. And I think it's like more people who are doing the work, like the way you're doing the work. There's more people doing this kind of work than we've had before, from all different disciplines and different backgrounds. And so, it's like sometimes just finding each other, and sometimes it's just at a public lecture and it's like, oh yay, like good, let's talk, that we needed to talk and be there. So basically I also think like Indigenous history, like we can't only do it just from one discipline. It just doesn't really work. And it also cannot be, I'll say this, I don't think that Native history, especially in this region, can be done in the absence of doing African American history. Like we have to, we have to do that. It's really, really important because we're going to be missing all sorts of pieces if we don't. So yeah, no, great questions. And yeah, we'll talk more. I'm so glad to meet you. Thank you so much for being here. And Angela too. Also, Angela, if you have any thoughts, don't mean to put you on the spot, but I always put you on the spot because, because you have a lot to say. Yeah. Angela Barnes.
Yeah. Something about the research of the Foundation. I remember someone across it and scratched my head and wondering why did the Calverts in their will give the land to Piscataway and after the connection between Mary and Giles and Martha.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
Down the rest of the
Yeah.
And then, just kind of another thought that has been going through my head. And, you spoke about like, how did you come into this work? I'm a business major, marketer, but the ancestors brought me home to the
Yeah.
park. My whole life, I've always been, I gotta get out of Southern Maryland. I want to go see the world. And the funny thing about the Beltway is it's a loop that just keeps bringing. So, like 16 years ago, I came home.
Yeah.
And landed at the IP Foundation as a marketer. Never did I ever know the history of that
Yeah.
of our people. And I remember Gabby saying, "I'm so glad you're here," and I'm like, "I don't understand. Like, do you want coffee?" But I do now. Right?
Yeah.
And you never know where the creator, where your ancestors going to land you.
Right.
And it's just such an honor to be in that place, to be able
Yeah.
to tell these stories and to share, and even break down some of those patriarchal views across the river. And I have our friends from Mount Vernon saying the river unites us, doesn't divide us.
Right. Right.
And so it's just such an honor. Anyway, I'm starting to ramble, so thank you.
It's great. Listen to you all day. So thank you. Okay. Are there any questions from the online people? I don't know if you do that or.
There's no questions, but
Okay.
a lot of people are praising the work that you've done, and thank you for sharing everything.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I think I also tell my students, I'm like, if you're going to do, history, like especially Native American history, just always assume somebody's grandchild is in the room or something. And tonight, here we are, what an honor to have you, for us to be in this space together, really. So I think I don't know if there's other questions. Really good conversation tonight, by the way. Yeah.
I was just curious about what knowledge informs different lands that belong to Mary. It sounds like maybe there's some written record of that, or is a lot of it oral tradition?
Yeah, no, of that land, that's a fairly well standard way of doing research of land grants and those traces. The part that I'm interested in too is that in doing history, like standard history work, which is never standard, right? But not just the deeds and the wills and all of that, but trying to get a sense of what was the meaning of these places, right? What would this land have been in the thought of the Piscataway world, and then kind of trying to retrace that back. Sometimes, actually, a lot of times, what I'll do too is I'll work with some other Algonquian speaking elders or others, or Iroquois Haudenosaunee, where some of our I try to kind of figure that out and then apply that logic, because then you can maybe look at a manuscript a different way and say, I don't know, but if I were to read it from the inside out this way, maybe it's going to show me something else. I don't know. We'll see. So I've been really curious about, right, Mount Vernon. I don't know if any of you were here for Thaisa Way's lecture. And Thaisa is a colleague, and I work with her at Dumbarton Oaks, and we were trying to figure out, okay, so Georgetown, and she's like, what about the history of Dumbarton Oaks? The way maybe we would be thinking about Dower House. I'm like, well, it's not in the water. It's kind of back there. I don't know if this would have been as some places become more important because of other cultural contexts and values. But what's interesting there and around Georgetown, you have these high spaces. And spaces over the creek, and even think about Rock Creek and the quartz and the stone quarrying, which people do know about, right? And so when you get into like high spaces, I was like, when you go like into these like far back spaces, are those places where maybe somebody went for vision questing? I don't know. Just like based on, you know, the way land features might operate. So these are just, yeah, I know it's like great. I'm just answering this, but I think that there's just that's a lot, and you know, what's being said is that we need like all of these strands. But I'm starting to think about like in a place like tonight with a landmark lecture, and I get asked a lot, and some other folks get asked a lot about like, well, what's the Piscataway history? And like, there's some of this material like I gave you, kind of like the overview, just, you know, it's pretty much going to be the same everywhere. But then when we start to focus in, we can start to build. There's actually these spaces that I think once we start to put them together, that kind of reunifies a story. It re-energizes, indigenizes. It's just a deeper history. And I think coming from, you know, even just invoking Mary Kittamaquund in this, and then her relationship to what became, you know, the Custis land, Washington's land, that also gives us a deeper view, even more into this particular place that's related, right, to Martha Washington. I just, you know, it's just another deeper part that we just don't think about. So it's just worth exploring.
Piscataway are written the will.
Yeah, I came across a document. I can't remember which Howard's William or whatever, but okay.
Yeah.
So
Right.
sister-in-law.
The other one, yeah.
Anyway, he requested in his will the land to Piscataway, but his nephews did not honor that will, and then it later became subdivided as
Right.
Howard Manor and
Right.
you know, things of that nature. So, but that was after the original reservation of the land
Right.
was set aside by the Marin colony between Piscataway Creek and Madeline Creek. So this is during the kind of Protestant
Right.
confusion in the landscape.
It just seems enormous. I mean, speaking as an anthropologist, a foundational anthropological idea, you know, sort of ideas about gifting is that, which is an attempt to understand most indigenous perspectives, that the gift is not what a person does to another. It opens up these transformative, multi-directional spaces. So an aspect of the self of the donor is permeating into, the spirit of the gift is permeating into the receiver, who in turn is reciprocating in other complicated ways, and with bequests, so that sometimes it becomes an exercise both of power and also the kind of need to be associated, in this case, located in a deeper sense in the land, perhaps consciously or unconsciously.
Yeah.
That seems just an enormously important
Yeah.
thing to trace and be
Try to come back.
Yeah, that's what I think. It's like the forest still wants to be a forest. You know, you like just keep mowing, and like all these little saplings just keep coming up. It's like it still wants to be what it you know, it wants to be what it wants to be. And when we're talking about and there's another actually Piscataway Chaptico woman leader that I've been tracing out, named Nanjemoy, and again, talking to people, we just are like, we think what was it? It was a Mohawk clan mother actually said to me, she's like, those grannies just want to be found. They want somebody to hear them. So yeah. So do we have time for one more question? Yeah, one more question.
I've been teaching about women, Indigenous women leading at the UN and like as political leaders. And I wondered, and I think you were starting to answer earlier, I was thinking about your intertribal Native Women's Organization as part of that.
Yeah.
Organization about reclaiming some of these histories.
Yeah.
Elevating them.
Yeah.
Or anything you'd be willing to share.
Yeah. No, I'm really.
You don't need to tell me why you would get a bunch of women and be close to them.
Yeah, no, yeah, and it's just it's a long trace, but actually very. So you know, I do a lot of Piscataway work, but I also do a lot of global work, and I'm very much informed by the global Indigenous movement. And yeah, like working with like the foundations of the Permanent Forum and all of this work. And so I think that it's really, it's really key when people start to share their stories with each other and their experiences. They're so, they're distinctive, right? Everybody has some uniqueness to them, but at the same time, it's not just being able to relate to each other because of what happened to them colonially, but also with the ethics that they carry of caring for water and earth, or like wherever they're from, this kind of women's responsibility particularly. So yeah, no, I'd love to talk to you more. I think it's really important. And that's why, again, like kind of opening this up so that the histories are not done in isolation, because some of the insights that I've gotten, and you don't want to like overreach on it, but some of the insights that I've gotten in terms of like, what does it mean for people to be river and forest people, have gone from talking to Amazonians. Had like Amazonian people like look at those paintings of the dugouts and the canoes, and they're like, yeah, that like, yeah, like that's our that's our life. And also then sometimes asking, well, how did you survive, how do you make it, because we're not sure if we are, because they're like right in the middle of it right now. And so having, yeah, right, and there's that kind of space. And being in Washington, we're in Washington DC, like the world comes here, and that includes the Indigenous world, which is really beautiful, and like being able to relate to each other intertribally, but that there is also there's basically a protocol that Native people have. It's just being polite. It's not that different from what anybody else does, but like when you go to somebody's home, like you greet them, you're like, hey, give you a gift. Like, how do we act in your space, and how do we honor that? So yeah, so that's a lot of what happens here. Yeah, thank you. So yeah, it was so nice talking with all of you tonight. Thank you so much. Give me a lot to think about. Okay. Thank you. Oh, that's all right.